Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Skynet Today's Last Week in AI podcast, where you can hear us chat about what's going on with AI. As usual, in this episode, we'll provide summaries and discussion about some of last week's most interesting AI news. You can also check out our Last Week in AI text newsletter at lastweekin.ai for articles we did not cover in this episode. I am one of your hosts, Andrei Karenkov. I am finishing my PhD at Stanford, studying AI, and I'm currently starting work at a small company using generative AI for some cool things.
And I'm your second I want to latch on to those cool things. I don't know if you'll be able to talk too much about it, but I do want to ask. I
don't think we really know what the cool things are exactly yet.
Oh,
so I'm
even
kind
better.
I'm waiting till we figure it out.
Okay, so you're even in stealth, to yourselves.
Yeah.
Even you don't know. Okay, that's
we don't know if the things we want to do we'll actually do because they might be too difficult. We'll see.
Okay, very exciting. Well, my story isn't nearly as exciting. My name is Jeremy. You probably know if you're from the podcast before. I do a lot of stuff at the intersection of AI and national security. I have a company called Gladstone AI that I co-founded with a couple of people. And I also have a book. If you want to check out Quantum Physics Made Me Do It, it's available at fine bookstores everywhere and some pretty crappy ones too, I would imagine, just given how distribution works. But if you want, if you want to check that out, feel free. And yeah, Andre, what kind of week do we have?
We have, as usual, a pretty busy week. So when we talk about applications in business, we'll talk about Stability AI, having some business trouble, and then a bunch of open source language models and chat assistants coming out, and then a couple lightning round stories. And research, we'll be talking about the llama effect, how now there's a whole trend of open source alternative to ChatGPT. And we'll also talk about Auto-GPT and Baby X.AI, these so-called autonomous agents. And again, there'll be a few more other stories. Then in policy and societal impacts, we'll talk about a roadmap for getting AI companies in check and China's proposal to manage AI services. And lastly, as always, we'll have art and fun stuff. Well, we'll talk about creativity in large language models, some new stuff from Adobe and Meta on animating and video editing. So as usual, a lot of stuff to delve into.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at how the balance every week, you kind of get the vibe of oh, this is a week where it's just all about ChatGPT or it's all about GPT-4. I feel like this week it's more balanced, but there's more AI policy stuff than usual, which is it's kind of interesting. It's less technical too, but it's that feels like the vibe of the week.
Yeah, I think so. And I think open source also. So yeah. I guess we'll see as we get into it. And one last thing before we do that, though, last week I just mentioned that it'd be cool if we got some feedback via comments on lastweekin.ai or via Apple reviews. And we were delighted to see that people actually, wrote some reviews. It was really cool to see, actually 2 text reviews and a few more just ratings. Someone said it's required listening to keep up with AI, which is very humbling. And yeah, it's feels great to be lauded, obviously, but also feels good to know that people are benefiting from this. So yeah, if you are the sort of person who likes to review things, we would appreciate a review as well.
Yeah, and if you have ideas about what you'd rather we cover more or less of, that stuff is always useful too. And we're just happy to be here, and we'd be having these chats either way. But it's just kind of cool that some folks are listening in. So, do you want to dive in?
Yes, let's get into it. So first up in applications and business, we have actually 2 stories that are sort of related. First, we have Stability AI announces new open source large language model. And second, we have Open Assistant released. This is a YouTube video, and this is supposedly the world's best open source chat AI. So first up, Stability AI, which released Stable Diffusion and I think also Midjourney, has announced that they're releasing language models, which are the backbone of ChatGPT. And these are between 3 billion and These language models, for now, only 3 and 7 billion sized ones are available. And then later on, they do plan to release larger ones that are more akin to what ChatGPT is powered by. It's all trained on mostly open source data, unlike these closed source industry ones. And they made it available in a few ways, including a public demo, a software beta, and a full download to the model, which for most of these industry models, obviously OpenAI or many other ones, you cannot download the actual language model. You can only access it through an API.
Yeah, I found one of the really interesting through lines with these stories, especially this week and last week, is it kind of seems like we're not just seeing a movement towards building open source models. We're seeing a movement increasingly towards like the idea of an open source stack, like an end-to-end stack that includes everything from an open source data set. Here they use this data set called the Pile, which is a pretty famous data set in the space. It was created by this grassroots collective of researchers at a company or organization called Auto-AI. So you got them kind of opening up this open source data set. You've got open source frameworks increasingly for like reinforcement learning from human feedback, all these things leading to like an open source model. And so sort of interesting to see, like increasingly it's getting easier and easier to build models for free, to build performative models for free. And so it's not just about the models, it's also about the kind of the background, the stack that's leading to the model creation also being open sourced.
Yeah, no, that is very interesting. And that is pretty related to the second story here, which is about Open Assistant. So this one was run by the Leon. I don't know how to pronounce it, but there's this nonprofit organization called Leon, which is focused on basically open sourcing things. And they had previously open sourced a big data set for training these text to image type models that actually was the basis for Stable Diffusion and some other things. And now they have been working on Open Assistant, which is a language model, but fine-tuned for chat interactions. And now they have been working on it for a while. They had a whole crowdsourced data set of conversations to fine-tune an existing set of language models on. And once again, they're saying, we'll release the code, the data set. I think they will release models and they have a public demo. So kind of a similar story.
Yeah, and this is also like the or one face of this whole operation is this pretty prominent YouTuber called Yannick Kilcher, and he's really big in the open source movement. Sort of got this like techie libertarian vibe to him. And in the announcement video that he put together, it was again one of these things where the story is. A small part of it is the model, but then a big part of it is like, hey, we made this data set. And this data set, like the models that they release are almost treated more as like proof points for how good the underlying data set is that generated them. And it is a really interesting data set. I think even the way it was collected, right? Because they ended up using this tool, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the tool was specifically. Was it Share GPT? I think that was it.
Something like it, yeah.
Yeah, like basically the idea is, you go and use ChatGPT and you have a cool conversation with it and you want to tell your friends about it. This tool, Share GPT, allows you to like save and send your conversation. And as a result, they've built a lot of the infrastructure you need to kind of build and curate an open source data set. So that's kind of like the tool that I think is powering a lot of this data collection. And the scale is pretty impressive, right? 600,000 interactions captured, 150,000 messages, 35 different languages. All this was done by over 10,000 volunteers. So, pretty sizable effort. Kind of something, again, in the spirit of like Bloom, right? Where we've seen these big international collaborations come together and create scaled models. Auto-AI also comes to mind with this sort of like GPT Neo type thread. So a lot of these open source projects now looking more and more kind of decentralized, more and more collaborative. It's sort of an interesting dimension shaping up here.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite interesting to see this as a trend. And there's even more kind of things we can note here. So as with the stable LM thing from Stability AI, which we said, for now you have 3 and 7 billion parameter models, and you eventually you'll have bigger ones. Similarly here, the Open Assistant is in the smaller range of models that can be fit onto one GPU. So if you have a really expensive GPU, like $10,000, you can fit a pretty large model. But something like ChatGPT, it's probably running on essentially a supercomputer, a whole cluster that no single person has in their home at all. So far the paradigm is to have slightly less powerful models. And we also saw this with Llama, which we'll talk about as the basis for some of this. Less powerful models that can be run basically by people in their home if they have pretty good hardware, but also having APIs and public demos to be able to use it without running it yourself.
Yeah, and there you again see, right, that libertarian vision of the like decentralization. A GPU in every home running a reasonably good language model is very much like you can tangibly feel that vision kind of echo through these products as they're launched. So kind of interesting too, right? From we talk about malicious use every once in a while on the podcast, and like this definitely brings that to mind. The sorts of things that you can do with these models. If you go to ChatGPT and you ask it to, I don't know, generate like some kind of malware or whatever, it will generally refuse to do that. What happens when you start to decentralize access and democratize access to these systems, you're lowering the bar to access for malicious use capabilities as well. And so, always this argument happening out there, policy-wise, is it good to proliferate? Is it bad? And ultimately, like, what can we even do? It kind of seems like the toothpaste out of the tube, and, like, it's not going to go back in, at least when it comes to models of this size and scale.
Yeah, it's it's kind of funny. You mentioned Yana Kilcher, who is a YouTuber who has made a lot of explainer videos on different AI papers, and more recently he's been covering AI news, and he sometimes has opinion pieces. So he made 2 videos about Open Assistant. He's involved at a pretty high level as one of, I guess, the leaders of a project. And he actually joked in the announcement of Open Assistant being open. He was like, well, we won't release it because of safety. Oh, no, I'm kidding. It's all going to be open, right? So it's kind of making fun of the trend in the industry of saying we are not making this available because we want to be careful and make sure it's safe and people don't misuse it and so on. And yeah, that's a mindset that, many people, including Yannick, have, that you should just make it open, and yes, maybe there will be some harmful outcomes, but that's not a good enough reason not to make it open and available for people to do what they want to do with it, which is, you can make an argument for that case, and it's not hard to predict how people would misuse it. I mean, Yana Kilcher himself made GPT-4chan, which was a language model that was fine-tuned to be racist and homophobic and generally terrible, and do harassment. So once you have this open and anyone can fine-tune it to do anything, you can fine-tune it to be good at phishing or scamming or anything. But it seems like, maybe we can't really avoid it with these, intermediate-sized models.
Yeah, and it's to your point, right? Like it's so interesting as a way of focusing all of the political and like philosophical debates that people have been having over 2,000 years about, what to do with weapons. What, like, should people be able to have guns? Should they be able to have AI systems that can do eventually like an arbitrary amount of harm? Because that's sort of what we're talking about as these things get more capable. Like, at what point do you just say, okay, this system can shut down an entire like CIA website with a couple of clicks? Eventually it seems like we're headed towards those systems. At least I don't see a clear reason why that wouldn't happen. And so, like, where is everybody's risk threshold? How do we have a coherent conversation about this? And anyway, it's like, we're doing philosophy on a deadline, as many people have said before. But just sort of focusing all those debates that are still unresolved after thousands of years. It's sort of a ridiculous time to be alive.
Yeah. And again, both of these things happened just this past week, right?
Yeah.
So it's happening quickly, and I'm sure we'll start seeing more and more of these kinds of open source things. And in fact, we'll talk a bit more in the next section about some other open source stuff that has a lot of people excited. But for now, let's move on with another business story. And this is actually also about Stability AI. And this is covering how it is on shaky ground as it burns through cash and looks at a management overhaul. So Stability AI was founded in 2019, and it has been pretty influential. It raised quite a bit of money. It's trying to raise at a 4 billion valuation. I think it raised more than 100 million at this point. And it has released this very influential stable diffusion model and the Midjourney project. But interestingly, according to this article, it as a company is not doing very well. It's not seemingly focusing on being profitable. Midjourney is kind of still a weird product where you have to use it on Discord, as far as I'm aware. And the management seems a little bit improvisational, not very professional. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of look inside this pretty important organization. I don't know. What did you take away from this, Jeremy?
I mean, my take home from this was just like how weird this is as a company in general. Like every time I hear something else about Stability, it's just kind of like it gives me the not the creeps, but the weirds. Like I'm confused by them, and like there's a couple of points here that really helped crystallize, at least for me, like where that vibe is coming from. One of which is, like you said, they're burning through cash, and there seems to be a lack of like a coherent. Not go-to-market strategy, but certainly a coherent revenue generation like strategy in the long term. One of the things that they talk about that I found really confusing is how early on in the kind of history of Stability AI, the CEO and co-founder or founder, who, by the way, is Ahmad Mostak. So he had these two different business models in mind, apparently, one of which was that they would make money by doing consulting and help companies like incorporate AI tools. And then the other, which is kind of, I don't know, red flaggy to me from a startup standpoint, because consulting is like notoriously unscalable. Like you can only scale as fast as you can hire quality talent. And so your margins go to zero and you're basically doing like a mark to labor market play. And then the other strategy they were thinking about was this idea of just like courting sovereign wealth funds by setting up satellite offices in their countries. And in return, the idea is that those wealth funds would invest in Stability AI, which, I don't need to say this, but that's not actually revenue, that's investment. So like, I don't get how that turns into a sustainable business. I'm suspicious that I'm like missing something fundamental. Maybe the article doesn't quite give us that like the plausible long-term outlook. Maybe that's part of the idea here, but it certainly is odd to look at this company, that's looking to raise at a $4 billion valuation. They've only been around a couple of years. So like so many of these generative AI companies, we're seeing these massive fundraisers on the backs of unproven business models. And to me, that's an interesting recipe for potential losses, just because we don't know. Like, yes, you can reach scale, but can you reach scale and profitability? And all kinds of reasons to wonder about what the margins will be like long term, especially because they're open sourcing their models, right? It's not like that's proprietary info. Anybody else can, in principle, serve up one of their models too, and then you're competing at the margin on just like who can deliver it cheapest, which if you believe in competition is for losers, the whole Peter Thiel school, like it seems like a little bit of a dicey move.
Yeah, I think it's kind of points to another interesting trend. So I do think they have some of their models closed source, like Midjourney V5. They're like more state-of-the-art stuff. That is their secret advantage. And they do have pretty good quality, like better than DALL-E. I would say Midjourney might be ahead of a pack. But at the same time, we are at a point now where it's not that hard to create a business that offers text to image generation. And we're seeing it all over the place, right? We have it in Bing. I'm sure there was a website, I think ArtStation or one of those websites also integrated it. Shutterstock will have it. So AI to image generation is just kind of proliferated now. It's not, there's no moat there. Anyone can build a business about it. So the technology itself is not kind of something that you have any sort of holdover, right? OpenAI, ChatGPT, that still is pretty hard to launch something of that quality and scale. But having a pretty good text to image model as part of your product is not difficult. So building a business around text to image now seems maybe not the wisest. And as you said, just by virtue of capitalism, it's going to be a race to the bottom of whoever does it the cheapest and well enough, I suppose, will wind up winning out. And there's going to be probably a bunch of players trying to take that spot.
Yeah, and as image generation gets better and better too, and you can generate better and better images for cheaper and cheaper. I mean, I expect open source alternatives like, we're going to get to a point where you're generating photorealistic images with free products, and that point isn't going to be that far down the line, especially given the progress we're seeing in like compute hardware. So I don't know, like I'm not sure how long this model, even as it is right now, can be sustained, but I've been proven wrong before. I'm just curious to find out how I'm going to turn out to be wrong this time around. But definitely an interesting situation for Stability AI rather to be in.
Yeah, and Stability AI, there's some other kind of interesting aspects to it. So Ahmad Mustak, the CEO, is pretty active on Twitter, and he, is pretty outspoken. He apparently likes to give AI researchers radical independence. So there's the ability to hand off expensive server time to researchers without any oversight, which means you can easily rack up the bills. So it seems like this is running more like a sort of AI research outfit than a business, but still has expenses in the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, which, has been very cool for progress. And the company has done a lot to further this text to image paradigm. And now they have also released these open source language models, but maybe they won't be around for too much longer if this is kind of their approach.
Well, yeah, and that's a really good point too, right? Like when you think about who the big leaders are in this whole race to AGI or scale at least, you think about the OpenAIs, the DeepMinds, the Anthropics, all of whom sort of have partnerships at the very least, if not are outright owned by massive companies that can offer huge amounts of compute credits. So like they've kind of got this source of raw compute juice that I'm just not sure, like Midjourney as this kind of this very different arrangement where they're basically standing on their own without without the same kind of partnership set up for access to compute resources. That seems like it could be a strategic issue long term, but I guess remains to be seen.
Yeah, so we'll see where this goes. And on to a few more stories in our lightning round. First up, we have Elon Musk creates a new artificial intelligence company, X.AI. So last week we noted how Twitter, at Elon Musk's behest, has been buying up a whole bunch, like thousands of GPUs to do something AI related. And now Elon Musk has incorporated X.AI, which is gonna do something AI related. It's not clear what, but there have been some kind of whispers in the AI community that there's been some recruitment for this for a few weeks, and I guess in an interview with Fox, Elon Musk has mentioned the desire to create Truthful GPT, which is like GPT but unconstrained by political bias or something of that sort. I'm not entirely sure. So not too much to say on this yet, except that X.AI will jump in and presumably start training models and doing something this next year.
Yeah, he apparently, like Igor Babushkin, who's this like former DeepMind and former OpenAI guy, is who he supposedly is tapped to lead this, at least according to the article. And it is really unclear. There is a bunch of speculation, obviously the usual Elon stuff, like he doesn't trust the big labs on safety. He said that a lot about OpenAI, about DeepMind. and obviously revealed more about that in his big famous Tucker Carlson interview, where he talked about talking to Larry Page at Google and kind of finding out that, at least by Elon's light, Larry Page wasn't safety focused enough, and that this caused him to start OpenAI. And then, he seems to be repeating the same thing. So it's unclear whether the results will necessarily be different. But the other thing is too, he's talked quite openly about the idea of biases in, like you said, Andre, political biases in, say, OpenAI's models, that sort of thing. So I don't know. One of the dimensions this kind of worries me along is like, I would hate to see AI become politicized in this way, where you just have like kind of left-wing aligned labs and right-wing aligned labs, and everybody's shouting at each other. And this fundamental question of AI safety, of physical safety, of malicious use of these technologies becomes something that we can't coalesce around. I think there's a real risk just given this sort of general direction. And it's not just Elon. It's not just like OpenAI. It's all these things kind of bundled together. So far, we've done a good job of keeping things kind of even keel and being like, all right, like we sort of agree on some baseline risks here. I don't know. I guess my 2 cents here is I really hope that trend continues.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's been kind of a work in progress. I've seen a little bit just on Reddit. Some people have been unhappy around ChatGPT being a little more safe with saying, oh, I'm a language model. I can't do this. I can't do that. Bard also had quite a bit of that, where it will just refuse to do certain things that in some cases it should be able to do and are not bad. So I think there is this, again, libertarian argument of should we, really be safe and make the model not say anything bad or contribute to anything bad, or should it be a little more open-ended? And that's going to be an ongoing conversation. But also, as we get into, more than just saying, but doing things, that's where AI safety will be big. And I think the conversation will evolve pretty quickly.
Yeah, one last thought on that too. You kind of brought this to my mind was just the idea that maybe the reason that we haven't seen the kind of polarization that we have in other areas in AI is like the problems of safety and the problems of policy in AI are so complicated that you can be on the right and really love the idea of like a libertarian policy, but have 2 completely different views about how things should go. So for example, like, Aleuther AI, they have this view that, we're going to open source these huge models. Why? Well, so that safety researchers can use them to do alignment research and help with that, because they're concerned about catastrophic risk from AI accidents. And they're worried that, if OpenAI has all their models closed and DeepMind has all their models closed, then the kind of academic safety community can inspect them and come up with new ideas. And then on the flip side, you have the other libertarian side of the coin, more maybe the like Jana Kilcher side that says, well, you know what? I don't believe in this safety bullcrap. I just want everybody to have democratized access to this, no matter what these things can do. And so like it's the same underlying kind of political philosophy, but in one case you care deeply about catastrophic risk, in the other you don't. And you kind of see the same on the left as well, with some people more focused on, say what they call present day risk, ethics and stuff like that at the expense of catastrophic risk. Other people, it's the opposite. So it just seems like so mangled that it's difficult for this to become polarized politically, because there aren't just 2 sets of solutions here.
Yeah, it's more of a 2D grid of concern than a 1D. Yeah. Next, we have Google's big AI push will combine Brain and DeepMind into one team. So DeepMind has been a subsidiary of Alphabet for a while. They were acquired in 2013. And this is just a big AI research outfit, basically similar to OpenAI, like we discussed before. And now, basically, the relationship between Google and DeepMind will be closer. So DeepMind will now be Google DeepMind, and presumably they're being folded in to help Google compete against OpenAI and really speed up this, AI productization of research.
Yeah, and there's a lot of chatter in kind of the AI safety world about this and what it means. So just by way of background, like DeepMind was co-founded by Demis Hassabis, who is now up until 20 minutes ago was the CEO of DeepMind. And Demis is known to be quite concerned about AI catastrophic risk and AI accidents. And so for a while, as long as DeepMind had operational independence and was kind of seen as the cutting edge of AI, people in the safety world went, okay, great. One of the key leading labs is headed up by a guy who really worries about catastrophic risk. And his other co-founder, Shane Legg, also had similar concerns. And so that seemed good. So the fold in now has people a little bit concerned, like, hey, is Demis now no longer going to be able to exert the same level of influence over his teams? Or the flip side is maybe he's being given access to more resources because now Google Brain apparently is going to be moved under that umbrella as well. So it's a bit of a complicated situation, difficult to assess, but I think that the outcome of this might actually be fairly significant and impactful on the course of alignment research and safety research within Google writ large.
Definitely. Next, we have Amazon AWS expands generative AI efforts with Bedrock and Code Whisperer updates. So the Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud compute provider where basically any company can run computers in the cloud, has announced that it is now offering a few new things as part of its cloud AI services. So one of them is Amazon Bedrock, which is basically given access to various big AI models that are used in stuff like text to image and in ChatGPT. Apparently, there's actually a few different foundation models. So it would support models from AI21, Anthropic, and Stability AI, as well as new models developed by AWS, known as Amazon Titan. And this will include a text model for content generation and an embedding model. So in general, seems like the cloud AI provider race, which was already ongoing with computer vision and things like that, with Amazon versus Google versus Microsoft, now is going to include this whole chat agent aspect as well.
I think it was wasn't it like a week ago, Andre, that we were talking about Amazon coming out with an announcement to appease its employees saying, don't worry, guys, we're doing stuff in generative AI, right? And we were kind of like, it's hard to know, but they seem a little, and now it's like, boom, well, I guess there you go. Seems like a pretty significant move. And also from a business model standpoint, it seems like we're learning a little bit about how we're going to see some of these models commercialized. You see AI21 Labs showing up here on the list. There's Stability AI, Anthropic, and so on. So it seems like these big labs that are building foundation models now are, they're serving them up themselves, maybe in a B2C, like business to consumer way. Maybe they're also releasing APIs in other forms and bundling things into apps like ChatGPT, but they're also now starting to just offload their models to cloud service providers to serve them up for them. So sort of interesting to see like the deepening of the money-making stack around these models as people try to explore different business models. And this certainly is going to benefit Amazon significantly. And then, Amazon itself, AWS at least, launching Amazon Titan. It seemed a little unclear to me how effective, how powerful that set of models would be. I didn't see too much information, at least in the early press releases about that, but it'll be interesting to see how it stacks up.
Yeah. And on top of that, there was some other announcements. So they announced that they have a new cloud instance that people can use powered by their Inferentia 2 chips, which are specialized for AI. So that's another thing we discussed of chips specifically designed for AI. And they also announced that Code Whisperer, their code completion tool, code development tool, is being offered for free. So now it's competing with Copilot and Microsoft. So Amazon making some moves for sure. And now we have Samsung wants to release EX1, a human assistant robot, this year. So this was at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show, where Samsung Electronics made this announcement. That's kind of it. They didn't really have a demo and it wasn't very specific. So it seems like it might be somewhat BS. but it falls into another thing that happened where it's just generally trying to promote its robot business and has in fact invested in the company Rainbow Robotics for 50 million. So probably not very realistic, but may point to future developments from Samsung.
Yeah, kind of cool to see the form factor. If in fact, the photo in the article is to be trusted, if that is really the form factor of the robot, it reminds me of like the what was it, Seikan and a couple of other models that came out in like 2021 for robotic control and stuff like that, where there's basically this like vertical thing, and then there's one little arm that comes off it. And at the time, I kind of wondered, like, oh, okay, everybody seems to be building systems that kind of look like this. I wonder if what we're learning is, things are going to start to converge towards this sort of form factor. I don't know if since then, like, the industry's maybe moved on to something else, and this is a throwback thing. But it's sort of interesting to note that maybe that approach is still around, if this photo is even legit, which I'm actually not sure. Do you know, Andre?
I think they had kind of a demonstration. This is not the supposed EX1 robot. This is a previous iteration, and it's not clear how similar or dissimilar it'll be. But this is, like you said, a pretty sort of good take of what these kinds of things usually are, which is you have, a wheeled base, and you have a sort of little body that's like a column, and then you have one or two arms attached to it. So it's not very humanoid at all. And that is just easy to manufacture, easy to program, lots of these sorts of things. So I don't know, maybe we'll get to see what this EX1 robot actually is this year, maybe not. And moving on to research and advancements, where we'll have some pretty exciting stuff to talk about, starting with the article The Llama Effect, How an Accidental Leak Sparked a Series of Impressive Open Source Alternative to ChatGPT. So Llama was this model family of models from Meta, which was pretty much good large language models similar to ChatGPT. Initially, they did not want to release the models. They had some sort of kind of closed release to researchers specifically, but then maybe predictably, soon after, those got leaked and anyone could get them via BitTorrent, and a whole bunch of people ended up getting it. Now there's also multiple other models that have been built on top of Llama, and Stanford also has their own Alpaca, for instance, which is not based on the BitTorrented one, but still they developed an instruction fine-tuned version of Llama. We already discussed how Open Assistant is built on top of Llama, and there's a whole list of different things that are being based on Alpaca and Llama. So this is really kind of an interesting trend where a single model is spawning all these open source efforts.
Yeah, and I think this article was just really useful. It's pretty short, and it was really useful as just this like roundup of the whole, like you said, the cluster of different language models and other tools that have emerged from this Llama leak. And I don't know, I think one of the take homes for me was just appreciating the level of quality that you can reach with open source tooling. They're talking about Vicuna, which was a model built by this collaboration between researchers at Berkeley, Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, UC San Diego, and so on. And they basically, so they used shared GPT. Maybe that's where I got it from. I'm not sure if earlier when I said that in the context of open access, the open access model we talked about earlier, maybe I was thinking of this. Share GPT anyway is how these guys collected their open source data set. Again, that is that Chrome extension that allows you to easily share your chat GPT conversations with friends. And anyway, yeah, with this setup, they were able to reach 90% of ChatGPT performance. And the way they measured that was by asking GPT-4 to evaluate the text that was generated by their system versus ChatGPT. So there was a story there, not only of innovation in terms of like being able to make a ChatGPT-like system, but also just being able to like find this evaluation technique where you get GPT-4 to read the output of the model automatically and give you a rating. So kind of interesting. Yeah, a bunch of other things that were like frameworks that were based on Llama. So some were more focused on like helping you do, reinforcement learning from human feedback or similar techniques. But anyway, whole ecosystem emerging from that one Llama leak. And that's really been one of the big stories of the week.
Yeah, just in a matter of months, right? Llama was announced, I don't know, like maybe 2 months ago. It's now hard to imagine, but there's now dozens of open source projects and organizations working on it and pushing it forward. And we're seeing quite a bit of progress. Just like, again, it's quite surprising having seen the trend of scaling up and up over the past decade, really, and especially the last few years. These models, Llama, are relatively small, right? The GPT-3 in 2020 was already 170 billion parameters. These are going down to 7 billion, I think maybe 13 billion. But because we have these new techniques of training for longer and training with chat data and so on, they can actually be very impressive. So it's just also an interesting thing where the trend is moving away from scale as the only thing towards also having more of a sort of high quality data and good, I guess, training techniques.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Is like, what is the status of scaling right now? And I think this story raises that question. I think Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, had an article where he was quoted saying, it's not just about scaling anymore, at least not just about parameter count, model size. Other things are starting to matter, and I think that's where we're going to see a lot of advances coming in the future. And like, I think that there's a sense in which some of those comments might be exaggerated, in that we know scaling laws work. Like we do know that, if you increase the amount of pre-training data and the amount of processing power you're using and the model size altogether, you get a better result. But the difference is that sorry, I just had a call there. I had to, but the key is it depends on the kind of model that you use. So some models are just like better funnels that channel your raw compute power and your data into more intelligence. And so like, it just sort of seems like the model is, you can think of it as a funnel, and you're playing with the shape of the funnel when you change the kind of model you're using. But ultimately, it's about this question of like, how do you throw in more compute? How do you throw in more data and get more intelligence out? And it's just a question essentially of like, what's the bottleneck at any given moment in time? Is data the bottleneck? Is compute the bottleneck? And how do you want to spend your AI training dollar?
Yeah, and I think we've seen some interesting findings, especially chinchilla last year. And I do have to wonder, we have one set of scaling laws or a bunch of set of scaling laws, but what if you change the training algorithm? Do you have a completely new scaling law at that point? Right. So there's still some interesting questions. It's true that scaling will get us better performance. We pretty much know that, but there might be now new avenues, such as just having reinforcement learning from human feedback, that turn out to be maybe a better investment, like you said. So interesting directions here.
Yeah, well, and I think just as one last note to piggyback off your reinforcement learning from human feedback comment, one of the things that we seem to be learning as well is that models have a lot more capability than we necessarily realize. Like, you pre-train them, and then you try to prompt them in different ways, and you find they can do some things but not others. But then with just a little bit of reinforcement learning from human feedback on top, you kind of unlock a ton of value that seemingly was kind of latently contained in the model originally, but you just hadn't found the right way to elicit it. And as we see these models start to shrink, it kind of makes me think along those lines. Like, is it really that what's happening is we're just getting better at eliciting the knowledge that was already contained in some of those smaller models?
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I find really interesting here. Next story is Auto-GPT and Baby AGI, how autonomous agents are bringing generative AI to the masses. So we discussed this a little bit indirectly last week when we talked about Chaos GPT, which was built on top of Auto-GPT. So now let's get into it. So this has been a very big trend. A lot of people are talking about Auto-GPT and Baby AGI. Basically, the idea with these models is that right now with GPT or ChatGPT, the whole paradigm is you give it an input, you give it a prompt, some text, and then the model produces some text, and then you will then follow up with additional inputs if you want. But basically, it's one input, one output. And what these things are doing, and there's now multiple versions with Auto-GPT being sort of the big one that broke through, is allowing it to run recursively. So you say, do this, then there's some structure where the GPT-4 or GPT-3 agent will produce a set of steps that it needs to follow. It can query a bunch of APIs, search for web, etc. And it can tell itself, basically say, okay, now here's a new prompt, figure out how to do this, or analyze whether this was correct or not, and so on. And essentially, they can run in a loop where you give it one input and then it can run continuously until it achieved what you wanted, or maybe until it fails or it runs out of time or things like that. But this is, like the article headline said, is pretty much a different paradigm where now this is an autonomous agent that can run until it decides it meets its goal, as opposed to just running until it produces one output and then being done.
Yeah, and as a side note, like you have this option to run it in continuous mode, which like just be careful about your cloud compute bill because like anyway, people are sharing funny stories about how because it runs in this open-ended way, it can keep generating like next steps for itself. If you don't tell it to like stop, it can just keep running up the bill. So it's sort of funny, but yeah, no, fundamentally a new paradigm, very, very interesting one, and one where we're starting to see the line between like what is an autonomous AI and what is not an autonomous AI get really fuzzy, right? Because we have like GPT-4, which is the thing that, you give the system an instruction, GPT-4 gives you the list of steps, and then it farms out each of those steps to like another instance of itself and has a little dialogue with that instance. And so like overall, it kind of seems like a thing that's just going off autonomously on the internet and doing a bunch of stuff. But then the individual components that are actually doing the work aren't quite autonomous. I mean, they are just, like these same old systems like ChatGPT, taking a prompt, generate an output. And so it's sort of, anyway, I think an interesting blurred line. And it sort of makes me wonder how far this paradigm will be able to go. Along that dimension, one thing that comes to mind is just the context window, right? Like the idea that models like GPT-4 have this like maximum amount of almost like RAM, the maximum amount of text that they can read at any one time. And that in some sense limits the complexity of a thought that they're able to have, very roughly speaking. And so when we look at like a very long chain of actions that these models have to execute, it kind of makes me wonder if the failures of an Auto-GPT actually happen when you start to bump up against like that context window limitation. And as the context window gets longer, we might just see more and more complex chains of actions become possible and executable by something like Auto-GPT.
Exactly. Yeah. And this article does note that, this is very young. It's only been a thing for like a week or two. Very, very hyped up on Twitter and elsewhere. I think Auto-GPT now has more GitHub stars than PyTorch, which is insane.
Ouch.
But they still have all this sort of wacky behavior. So they can forget the initial thing you said. Here they had one example where this person asked it to do some market research on waterproof shoes, but then the LLM ended up just focusing its attention on shoelaces. It can also wind up going in a loop, right? So this lack of long-term memory and pretty limited amount of short-term memory, you can call it. It's just like the amount of text it can have as an input is kind of a big limit. And this actually brings us back. Last week, we talked about this research paper where they populated this virtual town with generative agents.
Right.
That was very cute. And it kind of was the same idea of like they prompted the GPTs to be like, pretend you're this person, and then they continually prompted them to make them agents. Except in that paper, they did some more sophisticated stuff with having a whole like memory module where you can write and read and stuff like that. So this is definitely pointing to a direction that I think we'll be exploring for a while in terms of how to actually agentize pre-trained models that are not, autonomous. And I don't know, this could get very powerful very quickly, it seems like.
Yeah, it also kind of suggests, at least in this configuration, one way that we could maybe measure progress towards AGI in a fairly interesting way. Like, basically, what is the maximum number of chained steps that your system can successfully execute? Essentially, what's the maximum task complexity that your system can execute for a given system? So, like GPT-4, maybe it's able to succeed at tasks that are broken down to X many substeps. You scale it more, you increase the length of the context window, and then you can increase that complexity. It's one of these perennial questions. How do we measure progress towards something as general as AGI? And I don't know, this may be a random off the top idea, but could be an interesting dimension to look at.
Could be, yeah. And I guess just one last thing I'll mention. Aside from the loop and recursive and autonomous stuff here, Auto-GPT also points to this other very important trend, which is giving these language models access to APIs. So as part of a project, you're able to query the web and do various things like that, which ChatGPT was not initially able to do. That is another thing that will really supercharge the abilities of these models once we figure out how to do it properly.
Yeah, and actually interesting safety debate over that whole thing too. There's a lot of people in the safety community pretty freaked out about the idea of just like hooking up a model like GPT-4, for example, that like earlier in its training process, before we had reinforcement learning from human feedback applied to it, was like threatening users through Bing chat and doing all kinds of stuff. So it's like, all right, let's give that thing access to all these tools and so on. So sort of interesting, like very inside baseball debate happening right now in AI safety as well.
Yep. And on to the lightning round stories. We have researchers use machine learning to improve the first photo of a black hole. So I think many of us may remember a few years ago, 4 years ago, that's crazy. We had this first photo of a black hole that was this really blurry image that was very exciting at the time as being that first image. And now there's a new iteration of it that is less blurry, that was just released in a report from the astrophysical journal Letters. And they developed a whole new machine learning model called Primo that is specialized for recovering high fidelity image for black holes. It was done in simulations of black holes. So yeah, it's, exciting for astrophysicists, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, this is the one where I really wish that AI interpretability was further along than it is. Because wouldn't it be cool to like crack that model open and understand better what it had learned about physics in order to do this? It's like presumably this like model has learned stuff about astrophysics. There's latent knowledge embedded in there that might complement some of the stuff that we're doing along other dimensions of astrophysics. So anyway, it's just something that comes to mind every time I see it. It's like, man, I'd love to know what that model knows, and someday maybe.
Maybe. Next story, tennis robot could pave way for advancement in fast movement robotics. This is from Georgia Tech, the social school. This is from Georgia Tech, the School of Interactive Computing, and they developed this robot named ESFER, which is the experimental sport tennis wheelchair robot. And that name is a homage to renowned wheelchair tennis player Asfer Vergier. So you can think of this as sort of an arm mounted on a motorized wheelchair that can drive around and hit tennis balls as part of tennis. And there's a whole video on it. It's pretty cool looking and does kind of address this challenge of, well, how do you make a robot able to do something as mobile and fast-paced as tennis?
And did they say anything about the performance of this thing, like how successful it is at playing tennis?
I think it's not nowhere near human level. It's capable of tracking a ball, which is in itself pretty complicated. They have orange balls here because that's easier to track. So it's kind of good as a practice partner, but it's not gonna outperform any human athletes anytime soon.
If you listen very carefully, you can hear Serena Williams breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah. And now we have OpenAI surprises open source community, unveils consistency models. So OpenAI has pretty much turned away from that open label, as many people have joked for years. But they have just released a new paper and code for it called consistently models. So these consistency models are kind of an iteration of diffusion models, which are how image generation usually works, that address one of the issues or limitations of it. Without getting into technical details, diffusion models kind of unnoise, denoise some data with multiple iterative steps. And this integrates another very cool idea that has been kind of being developed for a few years called probability flow ordinary differential equations, which is basically simulating a continuous process. So with the integration of these two things, you can sort of simulate an arbitrary amount of denoising at a time instead of just one pass. It's pretty technical, but the upshot is this is a better model for generating images according to OpenAI.
Yeah, and I wonder about the compute efficiency too, right? I mean, if the idea is skip a bunch of intermediate steps in the diffusion process, like actually, do you know if they mention like what the compute efficiency is relative to a standard diffusion?
So they say in the paper abstract that they demonstrate they perform existing distillation techniques for diffusion models and one and few step generation. So that's basically taking a diffusion model and making not iterative. That's called diffusion. And they say when trained as standalone generation, things also outperform single step non-adversarial. So basically, I don't know what they focus on the efficiency aspect, but they do say that compared to something that can generate things in one pass, if you just train it from scratch, or if you just distill what these existing models can do, it's better. So I would assume that it's probably equivalent compute to other approaches that do this one-shot generation, but better.
Yeah, which I mean, that itself, makes me think about proliferation. Obviously, every time the algorithms improve, like you sometimes like this can decrease the cost of computations and democratize access. So anyway, just like as we're thinking about the companies like Stability AI, is like, if techniques like this keep piling on, kind of makes you wonder again what happens to those margins if you can just generate high quality images on your laptop one day. Not that we're there, but it's just kind of anyway interesting to see the forward progress in that space.
Yep. And last research story. We have model that uses machine learning methods and patient data at hospital arrival predicts strokes more accurately than current system. So we've discussed this sort of thing previously. There was a model that predicted the likelihood of sepsis when you entered a hospital. And this is a similar idea that there's a prototype that foretells strokes more precisely than existing models. So the idea is that when you enter a hospital, when you are admitted, there's a bunch of data that can be used to predict if you're kind of I guess, having a stroke or about to have a stroke. And they showed that this prototype is quite accurate, has 84% precision in predicting strokes. So another example where, you can automate at least sort of having some system to predict the likelihood of something and whether we should be concerned about it based on just the data that you can get access to as soon as you get to the hospital.
Yeah, there's so much low hanging fruit for this sort of thing, and again, my mind keeps going back to this idea of like interpretability. Man, I wonder what this thing has learned, what heuristics it's using, let's say, to make it to draw its conclusions. But yeah, and you can imagine people debating whether it's okay to use something like this if the mistakes that it makes are simply different from those that our standard process makes. Like, how do you trade that off? It's the self-driving car thing all over again, but really cool to see those advancements for sure.
Yeah, and this is just still a retrospective study, so it's not been deployed anywhere. This is research paper to be clear, but we've already seen some of these sorts of things be FDA approved. So I think it's part of this general story of an ongoing kind of very widespread effort to research into ways that AI can be applied and eventually to push it out into the open in a safe way. And now let's talk about policy and societal impacts and safety. So first, we have a story, finally, a realistic roadmap for getting AI companies in check. And this is a roadmap from the AI Now Institute that has, a kind of pretty specific proposal, which I think, Jeremy, you have quite a few thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I have a couple of disagreements with it personally, but I think it's interesting to look at. One of the key themes that they highlight here is that right now we live in a world where companies like OpenAI and Microsoft can just release their systems at their own discretion, and they're sort of flagging this idea that, hey, maybe we should be flipping that paradigm. Maybe it should be up to the companies to show that their systems are safe before they get to release them. In other words, that the burden is actually on the companies to demonstrate safety and security. And interesting. It is an interesting way to go, and certainly for the more long-term risks, things like AI accidents, that seems like a really good idea, and ultimately probably would be necessary. But another approach that they take too is, asking this question: should this AI tool even exist? And they're giving examples of like all these controversial systems that have been used in the past, AI systems that are designed to predict people's political views, based on like images of them or their sexual orientation and things like that. And that is an interesting conversation to have as a society. It's a little unclear to me how robustly it can actually affect the world if we lived in this kind of open source universe that we seem to inhabit, where if you want to build a model and just kind of like let loose and let anybody use it, that seems to be on the table right now. But still, sort of, I thought some interesting ideas about philosophically how to approach this. It does take a pretty antagonistic tone to the tech industry, which I'm not sure is super constructive. I mean, there's almost a vague sense that they're attributing a kind of malice to like OpenAI. And I'm not sure that that's quite right. I mean, we've seen OpenAI open up voluntarily to audits from companies like the Alignment Research Center and people focused on AI ethics, and do, frankly, internal audits that are more robust than I think anything that a government would be able to propose or execute on. But again, I think this is just an interesting conversation starter. Always good to like look at these policy proposals as people try to scramble to figure out what the hell to do about more and more powerful AI systems.
Yeah, I think it's definitely at least a good part of the conversation that is somewhat different from any other proposals we've had before. In this one, I think it's kind of titled Confronting Tech Power, and it focuses on this notion of big tech and talks about all of the sorts of ways that you can limit the powers of these companies or, have oversight. Which definitely, I mean, will need to be part of a general strategy, right? Because it's true that right now Google and Meta and OpenAI, obviously Microsoft, all of these are the key players that have most of a say of what AI can or cannot do, at least at the cutting edge. As we discussed before, in terms of AI safety, that's not the whole picture. Now we have open source models. Now we have, other aspects to it as well. But at some point, we will need regulation. That much, I think, is obvious to just about anyone. And it doesn't seem like maybe very realistic approaches to regulation, which I think is maybe still the open question.
Yeah, very much so. And I think one of the interesting axes that's starting to form is like between people who say, well, look, regulation should be focused on breaking up big tech or democratizing AI development to make sure that Elon Musk is in this camp. He seems to be, at least, where he's saying, look, I don't want just Microsoft, just Google controlling like the AGI. Which I definitely empathize with that concern. But as we've talked about, I think last week, I think that is, at a certain point, it is in conflict with the idea that having a bunch of labs all co-developing AGI in a context where we have reason to believe AGI is intrinsically a dangerous technology, potentially very dangerous technology, is not necessarily a good thing. Like you probably want a small number of leading labs so that they can, not perceive that they're in a race to release as fast as possible and invest their marginal dollar in safety and their marginal time in safety. So it kind of seems like these two ideas, like, yes, let's have everybody compete, and also let's make AGI safe. At a certain point, we're going to have to figure out as a civilization, like which one of those two options we want to lean into. And it's not super obvious, that we're on track to have that coherent conversation just yet.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it's good that there is this report with a lot of different thoughts on different aspects of it, with different spotlights. We really can't get into all of it. It's like 100 pages of a report. It has stuff like the climate costs of tech and financial capital, data minimization as a tool for AI accountability, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of stuff going on. So as the article title notes, at least it's a realistic roadmap in some sense, even if the specifics of some of these suggestions may not be very realistic. I do think we haven't seen too many of these kinds of more comprehensive approaches to a non-technical side of AI safety. So it's good to see this.
And actually, speaking of very bold policy measures and proposals to deal with AI, we do have this story like coming out of China, where the Chinese government, or the CCP, is coming out with these new proposed regulations to deal with generative AI. And it's again, sort of similar actually in spirit to what we just talked about, the article that was looking at, anyway, having companies have the burden of proving that their systems are safe. Because here the Chinese Communist Party is looking to have companies submit what they call security assessments to authorities before they launch generative AI tools to the public. China is a big player in AI. If you're not following the space, there are a couple of big companies, Baidu, SenseTime, Alibaba. These all have their own chatbots or their image generation tools out there. And I think one of the big take-homes here is just how onerous these regulations will be if they're actually implemented. And you can sort of see a geopolitical reason, or at least a political reason, why that has to be the case. The Chinese regime obviously is super authoritarian. We've seen them crack down on free expression. You can't mention the Tiananmen Square massacre within China's borders. If you do that on social media, your stuff gets taken down, blah, blah, blah. And so in that context, they simply cannot allow large language models deployed by private companies to occasionally mention things like Tiananmen Square or some of the abuses of the Chinese Communist Party to Uyghur Muslims, Tibet, that sort of thing. And so what they're saying in the document, in the regulations, is companies have to ensure that AI does not call for the, quote, subversion of state power or the overthrow of the ruling Chinese Communist Party. It must not incite moves to split the country or undermine national unity, produce content that's pornographic, or encourage violence, extremism, and so on. And I just think, having seen what we've seen about jailbreaks, right? Ways of getting ChatGPT and similar tools to generate content that they're not supposed to generate. It kind of seems inevitable that we're going to see jailbreaks of any system that's built by a private company in China, and therefore that this standard is in practice impossible to actually apply, to actually live up to. And so it's an interesting question as to what this does to potentially stifle private sector innovation in China on AI. And I mean, the last thought I'll toss in there is, of course, these regulations, I don't expect that they'll apply to the Chinese military or to the Chinese government itself. So of course, we can expect them, to the extent that they can, to continue pursuing with kind of deploying their own systems regardless of their adherence to these things. But it's kind of interesting to see anyway the ecosystem effect of these regulations.
Yeah, it seems like a pretty hardline approach. There's this need for security assessments, but then also if it does anything wrong, you will be facing large fines, maybe a criminal investigation. You will need to update your model. And on top of that, what I found kind of interesting is this notion that the service providers must require users to submit their real identities and related information.
Right.
So if you want to jailbreak a model to say something that's against the Communist Party, well, if they have your real identity, now you're in trouble, right? So it's a very, very maybe extreme or maybe definitely a strong response to making sure that not only will these models be developed in a certain way, when they are out there, they are not misused. And if they are misused, there will be consequences and they will need to be changed. So maybe not too surprising, but still, I guess, kind of hard to imagine given, the complete lack of government oversight we have over here so far.
Yeah, actually, really good insight on the idea of the connection with the revealing of the identity of the user. Because yeah, you're right. It kind of flips the whole paradigm. It's like, okay, whose fault is it really? It is interesting, though, that this, well, hopefully, I'm saying from an alignment standpoint, puts some kind of economic pressure too on the Baidus and the Tencents of the world to try to figure out how to control their AI systems better. Unfortunately, even if that control, ultimately is in a direction that I might find politically very undesirable, that is like, towards the CCP way of thinking about things. But it sort of reminds me, there's a research team in California called called Redwood Research. That was it. So it's an AI safety research team called Redwood Research, and one of their big lines of effort, they're really focused on AI catastrophic risk. And one of the key tasks that I remember that they highlighted as a goal was to make an AI system that never makes certain categories of mistakes, like a language model that never says anything racist, like under any circumstances, or a model that always, let's say, references references poetry or something in some way in its answers. So finding ways to control AI systems in that absolute way, they consider to be a really important dimension of solving the full alignment problem for various technical reasons. And so, I don't know, the upside of this is like maybe this pressure ends up causing some genuine innovation on alignment. And that would be a good output, but how it's actually used, obviously, is it a whole other question. And with the CCP at the helm, yeesh.
Yeah, I can imagine a less extreme version of this sort of regulation, in the Western world. But it's kind of interesting to imagine the government involvement that will surely come, soon enough everywhere. And on to the lightning round. First, we have AI could lead to a nuclear level catastrophe, according to a third of researchers a new Stanford report finds. So we already covered this Stanford report, the 2023 AI Index report, where we covered kind of a variety of things it included. And this article kind of highlights a small bit from it where they surveyed a bunch of AI researchers essentially about how worried they are. And there is a whole, range of researchers where at least 58 of the researchers surveyed called AGI an important concern. There's research moving from generative AI to AGI, according to, again, 57. And as it said, a large fraction are worried to the extent that there would be like nuclear level catastrophes, basically a lot of people dying as a result of AGI.
Yeah, and it's one dimension that I found kind of interesting about this discussion too is like we're used to talking about race dynamics between the companies building the models, so Meta and OpenAI and DeepMind and Google and so on, but they were highlighting the risk coming from race dynamics between companies that want to launch new GPT powered products. So if you imagine like I don't know Netflix or something wants to launch a movie summarization model or something like that, it's not just on the model building end. There's also this race on like applications. Let's get the newest, potentially most untested system out there in the wild fast as possible. And anyway, tying that into this idea of the risk, as you might discover, oh shit, this model was poorly characterized and we put it in charge of something important and then bad things happen. So another interesting dimension to that risk story. Yeah, I think a last thought on this one too was who you ask about AI safety matters a lot. Here we're turning to Stanford AI like researchers in general. If you poll the AI safety community, you will get even higher rates of concern about this stuff. And then if you poll, maybe other universities and groups, you'll get very different responses as well. So always interesting to look at like who are the groups that are actually being polled. What is the extent of their potential knowledge about things like alignment, things like malicious use. Stanford, obviously, very educated crowd, no doubt. As Andre, all too well. But yeah.
And now a slightly different story that is kind of a business of research and business. Business Insider had the story inside the AI talent wars. Tech companies are ransacking university AI programs at Stanford, MIT, and Cornell in search of rare talent. This is a pretty lengthy story that kind of highlights this whole issue that has been the case for a while in AI academia and is now probably just going to keep accelerating, which is a lot of people that are doing a PhD or considering doing a PhD wind up leaving the research academic world to go to industry and either join something like DeepMind to do AI research as part of industry or just join something like Tesla to work on full self-driving, like Andrej Karpathy did, for instance. And this is kind of a fun article that just highlights the different ways that companies are trying to recruit people. There's often company-sponsored parties at AI conferences, as many people know. The pay rate is pretty nice. You get a lot of swag. So it's not that different. Generally, tech as a whole has a lot of this sort of recruitment push. But I think in AI, the fact that so much industry is present now within academia is a general trend that is pretty different from elsewhere.
Yeah, as I was reading this, my mind kept going to, I can't wait to ask Andre on the podcast what his experience of being recruited and poached was like as he got to the end of his PhD. So maybe that's my question to you, Andre. Like, have you experienced any of these things? Like, what's the vibe like as a Stanford student? What was it like?
I definitely started to receive more emails from just random places. I think Tesla might have reached out at some point. It wasn't, I don't want to give a wrong idea. I don't think it's something ridiculous, right? Where people are knocking at my door or sending me unsolicited gifts. It's more akin to like if you go to an event, then there will be industry presence and they might give you some cool stuff. Like this article highlights a Hot Wheels toy car that had Tesla Model X emblazoned across it. And of course, you get a lot of like water bottles and T-shirts and things like that. So yeah, it's been the case for a while, and I don't know if it will become even more prominent now as ChatGPT has heated everything up. It's not even clear that it matters too much if you're a PhD at this point. You may just need to be a good software developer, really. but it's a fun story, and it's quite lengthy. So I'm sure there's a lot of silly stuff that you can take away from it.
Yeah, well, I mean, but that's a dimension too that I don't know. I'd love to explore at some point. Is as we see foundation models come out and this sort of like centralization of focus on a smaller number of more scaled models, like what does that do to demand for the AI talent that's actually building these models? Like my understanding is what we're starting to see is the small number of people who are like building the GPT-4s are just getting compensation packages that are absolutely stratospheric and like literally like in the tens of millions. I think there was an article about this at OpenAI. I hope I'm not misquoting that, but like stuff like that. And then maybe the long tail, it's sort of less clear what happens there, but the impact of scaling on the requirement for AI talent is something that I think is a really interesting story that's still unfolding.
Definitely, yeah. I think at some point it's more about infrastructural knowledge than technical AI knowledge, and
Right.
we'll see. And then we have this kind of societal impact and creativity story. Photographer admits prize-winning image was AI generated. So a photographer who won the creative open category at the Sony World Photography Awards, this is the German artist Boris Edgelson, basically released a statement and said that he applied as a cheeky monkey with an AI generated image that was not real. And this was, I guess, kind of meant as a subversive statement to say that these awards and different, I guess, competitions are not ready for dealing with AI images and photography, and argued that there should be different entities, they should be different awards, things like that. So definitely a pretty, funny stunt in a way to broaden the discussion around this. And you look at the image, and I can definitely imagine not realizing it's like this black and white photograph. It has it's not like very high resolution. It looks like it was taken with an old camera. It has like a filmy aspect to it, and yeah, you really can't obviously see that it's AI. Although if you look closely, maybe you can start to doubt it a little bit.
Yeah, there's a little like streak of light that seems maybe a little unphysical, but it's so hard to tell. It's this like, yeah, some couple women who look like they have sort of like 1940s era haircuts
To
and very.
me, if you look at the right shoulder of the figure in the
the
foreground, the hand positioning doesn't necessarily make physical sense. So you really have to start thinking about like the geometry of what's going on.
Yeah, good point. Again, the hand. The hand is the giveaway. Yeah, yeah. I wonder how long that'll remain the case. But yeah, I mean, interesting also that he ended up turning down the award that he supposedly had won here. So kind of a bit of a philosophical position that, hey, this should not get an award, maybe as part of the subtext. Yeah, I mean, part of that debate that we've been having, or that discussion we've been having the last few weeks, is like, what is art? What is it to different people? What should be recognized and what shouldn't be? And maybe it is, make different leagues for this stuff, and hopefully find a way to get people to prove that if they're submitting to the human generated league, like it actually is. But a lot of interesting challenges for art, for publishing, for music, all those different things in the next couple of months and years.
And actually, just let's move on to the last section where we only talk about art and fun stuff. I guess that was already sort of part of it. The first story we have is exploring creativity in large language models from GPT-2 to GPT-4. This is a bit more of kind of a blog post that does a lot of reflection on where we have been and how we can think about creativity. And it tests these few different models, GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, and had some interesting conclusions where GPT-4 actually had some interesting weaknesses, and some was less variable than GPT-3 in its performance. And yeah, it's kind of a pretty interesting analysis of creativity that goes beyond a lot of what I've seen so far.
Yeah, and it picks up on another trend that we've started to see more and more, which is people subjecting AIs to what historically would have been psychological tests or IQ-like tests that would have just been given to human beings. And they go through three different ones in this blog post. One of them is this thing called a remote associates test. I don't know if that's remote association test supposed to be, or if that is actually the name. But the idea is you get three words like dream, break, and light, and you're supposed to come up with another word that links those words together. Right. So in the case of dream, break, and light, the word that you're supposed to choose apparently is day. So you have daydream, daybreak, and daylight. That kind of is a common theme there. And they throw this at GPT-2, GPT-3, GPT-4, and kind of see what sticks. And the almost weird thing was that the errors that these models made actually kind of made sense. Like, we're used to AIs making mistakes that make no sense whatsoever. In the context of this sort of test, it seems like you can kind of empathize a little bit. The choices that GPT-4 would make, you kind of be like, oh, okay, I see. Even though you got it wrong, I see where you were coming from there. So that was one test. There was another where the challenge was to produce as many alternative uses for everyday objects as possible. So, if you're given like, laptop, like what could you use that for? Well, maybe a body shield, maybe a plate, or like a piece of wall art, things like that. Again, the idea is just like measure the creativity of the system and its responses. And to do that, just get a little bit technical. They looked at, in this case, if you said, oh, we could use a laptop as a plate, a body shield, or wall art, you might look at the semantic distance between those terms, plate, body shield, and wall art. And basically, you're measuring creativity based on how different those different use cases are. So I don't know, I thought it was kind of interesting, as a way of poking and prodding at these systems. And it circles back to a pretty fundamental question about what is AI creativity, right? Is it just mixing together ideas that already existed in the corpus that the system was trained on, or is it something else, right? Interpolation between ideas or creation of new ideas. Are those things really different?
Yeah, so it's, again, as we keep coming back to, it's part philosophy, part science here, and the post does kind of make clear that this is not claiming to show how creative the models are, but rather to measure the level of creative process present in the generations. And yeah, it is interesting that more and more, to understand the models, like you say, we need to use more common psychological tools as opposed to like technical computer science tools. This is on the Artfish Intelligence Substack, which I found pretty pretty amusing. And again, this is quite long, so we can't get into all of it. As usual, you can find links to all of these articles on lastweekin.ai. So make sure to go there and follow up and read through it if you think this is interesting. And now we have AI generated Wake and the Weekend song goes viral. So there's a new song called Heart on My Sleeve that simulates the Two Stars trading verses about Selena Gomez. And this was presumably created with 11 Labs or some sort of AI that was fine-tuned specifically to do their voices. This was later pulled down from Spotify and elsewhere, but as you can imagine, it's pretty impressive, and I think it's pretty easy to find this amusing, where you have these two really big stars on the same song singing about something kind of absurd.
But who's not impressed and who doesn't find it amusing? Drake. Drake doesn't find it amusing. Apparently, he made this complaint to Universal Music Group, basically saying, like, to Spotify and Apple Music, saying like, yo, you guys got to prevent AI from like accessing your libraries, and just generally pretty upset, which like I definitely get. If somebody cloned my voice and did something like this, I mean, I guess I wouldn't care because it's not my livelihood, but it kind of shows you how close to home some of these technologies are hitting. And this is for like influential pop stars and stuff. like robocalls and things like that, automating sales processes and all that might get less attention in the short term, but a lot of people are in the line of fire these days.
Yeah. And I guess we should note that it is not entirely sort of realistic. You can, if you know AI sound, there's a sort of like weird, glitchy, sort of high frequency feel to it. So it doesn't, you could sort of tell that this is probably AI, as you could with AI images, until recently. But clearly, this is just an example where in a few months or a year, this kind of thing will sound like a real song. And all these platforms, Spotify, etc., will have to really figure out what to do with that. And speaking of companies having to figure out what to do with AI, Adobe, that hasn't been doing that much so far, has now launched AI-powered text-based video editing. So Adobe has Photoshop. It also has Premiere Pro, which is often used for editing films or commercials, anything really professional. And now they have some features that can do certain things. So specifically, this text-based editing is basically moving around parts of the video by looking at the transcript of what was being said. So there's automatic analysis and transcription, and then editors and producers can copy and paste sentences in different orders to move around the video. This is actually something that an existing company, Descript, has been offering for a while as its own video editing service. So yeah, and you can also just search in the transcript window to jump to different places in the video, and there's some other things that aren't related. So yeah, I'm actually kind of excited by this. I think I have made YouTube videos in the past and have played around with editing in Adobe, and this idea of text-based video editing is pretty powerful. And it's kind of surprising it took Adobe this long, to be honest, but it's exciting to see it get here.
You just had two like amazing drive-bys at Adobe there, where you started, I think your comment started with like Adobe, comma, that hasn't done much lately, comma. And I was just like, oh, so hard. But yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I haven't actually used Adobe for editing work, but I do a ton of like video editing stuff. And to your point, this really feels like one of those uses of AI that is very in tune with the way you actually need to use these systems. Like the number of times where I've had like a video and I'm like, I want to find the part where I talk about this or somebody talks about that. Just such a pain to do manually. And maybe we're not too far away from the actual edits themselves being made just based on written prompts. And it kind of makes me think of like, hey, maybe an Auto-GPT type thing could actually sort of work for that in the back end if you chain together a bunch of things. Like editing is one of those tasks that I could imagine being amenable to that as these systems get cheaper, at least easier to deploy at scale.
Yeah, actually, fun story. I used Descript to edit, I think, 2 episodes of the podcast. So it actually, I produced the transcript, and it had this feature of like, if you have interjection sounds like, or different pauses, or using words like, which you can remove. Basically, it offered to remove all of that automatically. And I tried it. And it seemed pretty good, but then when I published it, we got like a review that asked us to stop, right, because it was so jumpy and so on. So it definitely allows a lot of things. At the same time, editing audio or video just by editing with transcript is not gonna totally work, but it does offer up some new capabilities that are very useful.
So the take-home message here is everybody make sure you comment on this episode if it sounds jittery. Your comments are really useful, apparently.
Yeah, apparently. And last up, we have Meta has open sourced an AI project that turns your doodles into animations. So this is a small little cute like animated drawings thing to make almost kid-like animations. They had a web-based version of a tool where you upload a drawing of a single human-like character, and then it can make them move around in kind of cute ways. So, and you can choose to make it dance or be funny or jump and walk. And yeah, this is, just a sort of exploratory fun thing, but at the same time, you can easily imagine how this will be part of video game development pretty soon with creating walk loops and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's another instance of, another trend that we've seen, which is Meta looking to maybe differentiate itself based on how open sourcey they are. So like just, not necessarily building like the GPT-4 or like what, the Palm E, but instead focusing on making like solid open source models that people really love them for. So, interesting strategy maybe to get some good PR for recruitment or whatever it is, but definitely consistent with that and something I'm sort of curious to try.
Yep. And with that, we are done. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the podcast. Once again, you can go to lastweekin.ai to get the text newsletter and also get the links to all these stories we've discussed for this episode. As always, like we said, we would appreciate a review, or if you shared it with people who like AI, that would be cool. But we really mostly care about you listening. So we'll keep putting these out, and please do keep listening.